The phone rang at 6:30 inches the morning. Way too early. Good news never travels at that hour, my friend. I fumbled for the receiver on the nightstand. My body still felt heavy from unpacking boxes until midnight. I looked out the window. Dawn was just beginning to tear through the sky over the Blue Ridge Mountains. It painted the peaks of North Carolina with those shades of pink and crushed gold that had brought me to this corner of the world to start over. My mountain cabin. My dream. Finally a tangible reality after 40 years of waiting. But before the morning mist lifts and we continue with this story, I just ask that you hit subscribe and let me know in the comments what time the clock shows where you're listening right now. Do that and pull up a chair by the fireplace. Dad, the voice of my son Matthew cracked through the speaker. Dad, I need your help right now. I sat bolt upright in bed, my eyes wide open. My son never called this early, and he never, ever sounded like this. Desperate, breathless, like he'd been running for miles with the devil right on his heels. What's wrong, Matt? Is Sammy okay? My grandson, 10 years old. The mere thought of something happening to that boy squeezed my chest like an iron claw. Sammy's fine. It's the house. Dad, the bank is foreclosing on us. We're going to lose everything. The words stumbled out of his mouth, like water overflowing from a broken pitcher. Valerie and I fell behind on the payments. I tried to fix it. I swear to you I tried. But they won't listen. They gave us 10 days. I stood up and walked barefoot to the window. The view that had cost me $500,000, every single penny I had saved in my life, stretched out before me. Mountains, pine trees, absolute silence. 10 days, I repeated, tasting ash in my mouth. Matt, how did you let things get to this point? That doesn't matter right now, his voice pitched up, bordering on panic. Dad, I need your cabin as collateral. Just temporarily, I swear on my life. Sign the papers and we can negotiate with the bank. If you don't do this, Sammy loses his home. Your grandson is going to end up on the street. The world tilted slightly beneath my feet. My cabin, the sanctuary I had finally paid off just 2 weeks ago. The place I had moved into exactly 3 days ago. The place where, for the first time in my life, I had been able to breathe freely for the last 48 hours. Matt, I don't understand. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Why? There was no time. Listen, I'm heading up there on the 17th with a real estate agent who can handle the paperwork. Richard knows how to do this fast. Just trust me. Please do it for Sammy. The line went dead. I stood there rooted like an old oak tree with the phone in my hand, watching the sun climb over the mountains. Trust me. Those words echoed in the silence of my new living room. The cardboard boxes still lined the walls. I had just carefully unpacked my collection of architectural sketches. 40 years restoring historic buildings all over the country, breathing life back into old downtown theaters, rescuing colonial mansions in Charleston, preserving the stonework of the state capitol. Every weekend of my life I would drive up to these mountains. I would look at lots dreaming of the day I could finally buy my own piece of heaven. And now, after 2 miserable days of peace, my son needed it as collateral. I thought of Matt when he was a little boy. Those bright eyes, that insatiable curiosity. I remembered how he used to sit with me on construction sites, asking about load-bearing walls and foundations. How he said he wanted to be an architect too, until he changed his mind halfway through his degree. A degree at an expensive private college that cost me over $150,000. Then came the wedding with Valerie. Another $40,000. The down payment for their house in the suburbs. $30,000 that I loaned him, which never found its way back to my pocket. Sammy. I thought of Sammy, my grandson. He had just started 5th grade. He devoured comic books and said he wanted to be a marine biologist, even though he lived surrounded by mountains and far from the ocean. That boy didn't deserve to live with the fear of ending up on the street. The phone buzzed in my hand. A text from Matt. I know it's a lot to ask, but you're the only one who can help us. Please, Dad. I looked around. My cabin. 847 Pine Ridge Road. A place where property laws were taken seriously. a state where I had specifically chosen to buy because of its strong legal protections. But something was scratching at the back of my mind. Something about the timeline, about the desperation in Matt's voice, about Valerie. Valerie, who at family gatherings had barely spoken to me 3 times in her life, always glued to her phone, always wishing she was somewhere else. But Sammy, that boy deserved better than the mess his parents had made. I brewed some dark roast coffee strong with a dash of cinnamon from the local bakery where I had stopped for breakfast yesterday. The owner, an older woman named Mrs. Rose, had welcomed me like I'd lived there for years. "You're at the old Miller place, right?" she had said with a warm smile. "Beautiful spot. You're gonna love it." I had also met my neighbor Bob, a retired lawyer in his late 60s. He gave me a firm handshake and offered to show me the best hiking trails in the woods. We had chatted for an hour on his porch. He had mentioned how the law protected homeowners up here, especially retirees, how there were ways to bulletproof your assets if you knew what you were doing. The coffee burned my tongue, but I barely felt it. 10 days. Matt had said he would arrive on the 17th. That gave me a little over a week to figure out what was really going on, because in 40 years of architectural work, dealing with contractors, lawyers, city officials, and building permits, I had learned one sacred rule: when someone pressures you to sign papers quickly, you slam on the brakes and read the fine print. I thought about calling Matt back, asking him more questions, demanding details about the mortgage, the bank, the timeline of the foreclosure, but something stopped me. Instead, I sent a simple text. "Times, we'll talk when you get here. I'll help however I can," because I was going to help him. I always did. That's what fathers do. But I had also spent 40 years learning how to protect structures from collapsing, how to preserve what had value, how to recognize when a foundation was rotten on the inside long before it brought the whole building down. The sun climbed higher. The mountains watched, ancient and patient, and I stayed in my cabin holding my ceramic mug, feeling the weight of a decision I couldn't quite understand yet. Help my son, protect my grandson, risk everything I had sweat blood for, or do what I had done for 4 decades in my profession: take my time, examine the structure with a magnifying glass, and make absolutely sure I understood what I was facing before committing to anything. Matt said he was coming on the 17th with Richard the realtor. That gave me time. Time to think. Time to plan. Time to make sure without a shadow of a doubt that whatever I signed would be on my own terms. Because loving your family doesn't mean being stupid, and being a good father doesn't mean being a doormat for them to wipe their shoes on. I had learned that lesson way too late with Matt. Maybe it was time to teach him one in return. The mountains didn't answer. They never do. But they had seen plenty of folks come up here looking for peace only to discover that sometimes you have to fight for it. I took another sip of my coffee and started making phone calls. The next 3 days dragged on like wounded animals. I couldn't find any peace. I couldn't unpack the rest of my boxes. I couldn't enjoy the view that had cost me my entire life. Instead, I spent hours on the phone with Matt trying to piece together the puzzle of what had happened. Every conversation left me more confused than the last. "It's complicated, Dad," he kept repeating. "We fell behind on the mortgage. There were unexpected expenses. You know how it is, but I didn't know. That was the problem." Matt worked as a sales manager at Apex Luxury Motors, a massive dealership in the city. He made good money. Valerie had her marketing job downtown. They lived in a nice suburb, nothing extravagant but comfortable. Where had the money gone? "How much are we talking about?" I asked during our second call. There was a silence long enough to tie my stomach in knots. "The arrears are about $50,000. $50,000 behind on a mortgage. How does someone get to that level of debt without asking for help sooner?" "Matt, that's..." I bit my tongue. Getting angry wasn't going to help Sammy. "All right. Explain the collateral process to me. What exactly does Richard need from me?" "He'll explain everything when we get there. It's just basic paperwork. Quick and clean." His voice lit up with a fake plastic cheerfulness. "You're not going to lose anything, Dad. I promise. It's just to show the bank we have asset backing. As soon as we catch up on the payments, we release the lien. It's simple. Nothing about this felt simple. That same afternoon, Valerie called. It was the first time she had called me directly in, I don't know, maybe 2 years. "Arthur, I want to thank you." Her voice dripped with something I couldn't quite name. "Honey, or poison disguised as honey. What you're doing for us. For Sammy. It means everything. Matt is too proud to tell you how much this matters. Valerie, I'm doing this for my grandson. You understand that, right? Of course. Family comes first. That's the most important thing." She paused. "You know we've been under so much stress. Matt has been working so hard to give us the best. Sometimes things just spiral out of control, you know." No, I didn't know. In 40 years, I had never missed a house payment. I never missed an electric bill. I never let my problems become someone else's crisis. But I swallowed those words. Instead, I asked, "How is Sammy taking it?" "Oh, he doesn't know anything. Kids shouldn't worry about adult problems." She let out a light giggle as if nothing was wrong. "Actually, he's been asking about you. He wants to know when he can come visit your cabin." "Maybe this summer. Whenever he wants," I replied. "He's always welcome." "You're so generous, Arthur. Matt is so lucky to have a father like you." The call ended. I sat on the wooden porch watching the sun dip behind the peaks, and that word kept bouncing around in my head. Generous? Was that what I was, or was I just easy to manipulate? I thought about the $150,000 for Matt's education, how he had changed majors 3 times, turning a 4-year degree into a 5.5-year ordeal. I had paid every semester without a single complaint. The $40,000 for their wedding at a luxury hotel. Valerie wanted everything perfect. Ice sculptures, premium open bar, a bachelor party in Vegas. I wrote the check and told myself it was an investment in their happiness. The $30,000 loan for the down payment on their house 7 years ago. Matt said he'd pay me back in 2 years. I was still waiting. At this point, I didn't even bring it up anymore. Family doesn't keep score, right? Wrong. Apparently family does keep score. They just count differently than I do. By the 3rd day, I had gathered all the documents related to my cabin. The purchase agreement, title insurance, land survey, and the county tax assessment, showing the property's value at $650,000. More than what I had paid thanks to the recent market boom and the interior restoration work I had already done. The house had good bones. Original timber beams from 1997. But I immediately noticed how well the previous owners had maintained it. A new roof, 2 years ago. Updated, electrical. It was the kind of property that skyrocketed in value in a market where mountain land is worth its weight in gold. Losing this would destroy me financially. At 65, I couldn't start over. This was my retirement, my nest, my future. But Sammy, 10 years old, my grandson, the boy who still hugged me without embarrassment, who asked me questions about my restoration projects like they were the most fascinating stories in the world, who wanted to save the dolphins even though he'd never stepped foot on a beach. What kind of grandfather would I be if I let him lose his home? My neighbor Bob stopped by on the 4th day. He brought me some homemade beef jerky. He'd cured himself. Settling in okay, he asked, eyeing the still-sealed boxes in my living room. Been distracted, I admitted. Family stuff. His expression shifted. Lawyer instincts, I guess. Everything all right? And before I realized it, I found myself explaining the whole thing. Not everything, really. I wasn't ready to voice my doubts out loud yet. But enough. The situation with Matt, the collateral. The 10-day deadline. Bob listened carefully, chewing on a piece of jerky. When I finished, he stayed quiet for a long moment. "Are you familiar with a life estate deed?" he finally asked, casually. "Real estate isn't my exact specialty, but you might want to look into it. And conservation easements. The law has very specific protections for seniors who are vulnerable to financial exploitation, especially from family members." He held my gaze. He wasn't saying times, that's what's happening here. He was just saying times. It pays to be informed. After he left, I chewed on his words. Financial exploitation from family members. The phrase tasted like battery acid in my throat. No, Matt wouldn't do that. He was desperate. He wasn't malicious. There was a huge difference, but Valerie's voice on the phone echoed in my memory. That plastic sweetness, that fake gratitude. Everything about that call felt rehearsed. I opened my laptop and started researching life estate deeds, irrevocable asset protection trusts, property protections under state law. The more I read, the more I understood what Bob was suggesting. Ways to protect myself. Legal shields, safety nets. But using them meant I didn't trust my own blood. It meant I believed my son would actually try to take everything from me. The cabin creaked around me as the temperature dropped with the night. Through the window, the stars bloomed over the ridge, sharp, cold, infinite. I thought of Sammy's laugh. I thought of Matt when he was a kid, before Valerie, before the wedding, before money became more important than us. I thought of every sacrifice I had made, every check I had signed, every time I had put his needs above mine. And I made my decision. I would sign the papers. I would trust my son. I would help my grandson. But I would also spend the next few days learning everything humanly possible about property law, just in case. Not because I didn't trust Matt, but because I had spent 40 years in architecture, learning one absolute truth. Hope for the best, but always, always reinforce the foundation. Just in case. 2 days later, I needed groceries. The cabin's pantry was still empty, and I'd been surviving on coffee and Bob's beef jerky. It was time to stock the fridge. I drove my truck down the mountain into town, with the windows rolled down, letting the pine-scented air clear my lungs. For the first time since Matt's call, I felt almost normal. The research had given me peace. The law protected homeowners in surprising ways. Life estates, homestead exemptions. Even in the worst-case scenario, I had options. Trust, but verify. That was my new mantra. The supermarket was just south of town, but on the way I saw a spot called Times the Rusty Pine Coffeehouse Times, and decided caffeine was a priority. The coffee shop was inside a restored historic building, exposed brick walls and reclaimed wood. It was my kind of place. The architect in my gut appreciated the restoration work someone had done here. Original molding, polished hardwood floors, modern lighting that didn't fight. The historic soul of the building. Inside, there were about a dozen people scattered at the tables. I ordered a large, dark roast from a barista with purple hair. While I waited, I looked for a seat. Almost all the tables were taken, but there was an empty corner partially hidden behind a decorative room divider made of old doors. Perfect. I settled in with my mug and my phone, checking emails. Behind me on the other side of the divider, 2 women were talking loud enough to be heard clearly. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop. The divider just didn't block sound. Then I heard my name. My father-in-law bought this cabin with literally all his life savings, a voice said. Valerie's voice. That same sweet, cloying tone from our phone call. Matt says it's worth at least $650. 000, maybe more. As soon as the old man signs the papers, we give it a month, sell it, pay off Matt's mess, and we'll still have a nice cushion left over. My hand froze halfway to my mouth. Wait, I thought it was a foreclosure. Another younger woman sounded unsure. You told me the bank was taking your house. Valerie let out a laugh. A real laugh. Oh, please, Rachel. That's the story we fed the old man. We needed something dramatic, you know, to make him feel guilty. The grandson angle is what sealed the deal. She paused. We're not losing the house. We're just drowning in Matt's poker debts. $100,000 because my husband can't stop betting on those online casinos. His paycheck barely covers the minimums anymore. Valerie, that's... Her friend sounded uncomfortable. That's really manipulative. It's survival, Rachel. The old man has been sitting on that retirement money for years while we struggle. He owes it to Matt anyway for making him grow up without any luxuries. This cabin should have been ours from the beginning. Something cold like crushed ice crystallized in my chest. It wasn't anger. Not yet. It was absolute razor-sharp clarity. And what about the collateral story, won't he notice? The friend asked. There is no collateral. It's a straight sale. We already have a buyer lined up. Some guy from California who wants a mountain retreat. Richard Matt's buddy, who's an agent, is setting the whole thing up. As soon as the old man signs the deed, it's done. He'll end up back in a tiny apartment in the city before he even understands what hit him. God, Val, I don't know if this is right. Don't be so dramatic. I heard the clinking of ice in a glass. An iced latte, surely. Valerie always ordered that. He's had his whole life to make money. We are in our prime. We deserve this. I sat perfectly still. Years of inspecting construction sites had taught me patience. When you find structural damage, you don't react by screaming. You document, you analyze, you plan your response. Behind the divider, Valerie's conversation shifted to plans for a beach vacation as soon as the cabin money cleared. I stood up slowly, left a bill on the table and walked out. They never saw me. I had parked around the corner anyway. Once inside my truck, I gripped the steering wheel with both hands. $50,000 in mortgage arrears. That was the number Matt had given me, but Valerie had just said $100,000 in poker debts. The math didn't add up because none of it was real. My son, the boy I raised alone after his mother left us. The boy I worked double shifts for to put through college. He had looked me in the eye and lied to me. And it wasn't a little white lie. It wasn't an exaggeration born of desperation. It was a cold-blooded, premeditated scheme to rob me of everything I had. And Valerie, that phone call, thanking me, praising me, calling me generous, pure, cheap theater. Every word was written in a script designed to make me feel like a saint while I handed over my future on a silver platter. I started the engine, but I didn't pull out. Not yet. My mind reviewed the timeline. Matt called 8 days ago. He said he'd arrive on the 17th. That gave them time to find their buyer, arrange the sale, and make it look legitimate. Richard, the real estate agent, wasn't coming to help with collateral paperwork. He was coming to facilitate a theft. This cabin should have been ours from the beginning. Valerie's words echoed in my head. Arrogance. Pure distilled arrogance. As if I hadn't already handed Matt hundreds of thousands of dollars over the years. As if 40 years of my sweat belonged to them by divine right. I thought about Sammy. They had used him as bait, knowing I would do anything to protect that boy. And Sammy probably had no idea. A 10-year-old kid totally innocent while his parents conspired to put his grandfather on the street. Then the anger arrived. It wasn't a hot, explosive anger. It was a cold, millimeter-precise anger. The kind of anger that builds foundations and restores structures. The kind of anger that makes plans. I drove back to the cabin slowly, carefully, respecting every speed limit, thinking. Matt had underestimated me. They both had. They thought I was a naive, retired old man. Too tired to fight back. They had forgotten, or maybe they never knew who I really was. 4 decades in architectural restoration meant I knew every major contractor, lawyer, and building inspector in this damn state. I had worked on historic properties worth tens of millions. I had navigated Byzantine zoning laws, preservation societies, and heritage commissions. I knew how to build things, which meant I knew exactly how to protect them. Bob's words came back to me. Life estate deeds, conservation easements, asset protections. Before I had researched them as insurance. Now they were going to be my weapons. Back home, I pulled out my phone and searched for the number I needed. Stephen Mark's attorney at law. We had worked together on the restoration of a historic downtown theater, dealing with deed restrictions and heritage requirements. A sharp mind and even sharper ethics. If anyone could help me bulletproof my property while giving my son the lesson of his life, it was Steve. He answered on the second ring. Arthur, haven't heard from you in months. How's retirement treating you? Complicated, I said. I need legal help. A family matter. How fast can you draft a life estate deed for my mountain property? A day or 2 if we move fast. He paused. What's going on? I told him. Everything. The phone call. The fake foreclosure. The conversation I overheard at the coffee shop. The poker debts. Steve listened without interrupting once. A lawyer's skill. And when I finished, he stayed quiet for several seconds. They are attempting to commit fraud and financial exploitation against a senior citizen, he finally said. The law takes that very seriously. We could file criminal charges. No. My voice sounded flat, dry. No cops, no prosecutors. I want something more elegant. I want to protect my property in a way they can't undo or contest. And I want them to understand exactly what they tried to do to me. I looked out toward the mountains, toward the cabin I had dreamed of for 40 years. They think I'm easy prey. It's time to educate them. Steve made a sound of approval. The life estate deed is perfect. I'd also recommend a conservation easement. It restricts what can be done with the property, makes it practically unsellable for developers, and we'll put it in an irrevocable asset protection trust. It shields the house from any creditors. Another pause. When are they coming? The 17th. In 10 days. Meet me tomorrow at my office in the city. We're going to make your cabin bulletproof. After hanging up, I sat on the porch, watching the sun trace its path across the sky. Somewhere in the city, Matt and Valerie were congratulating themselves on their master plan, counting money that didn't exist yet, planning their beach vacation. They had absolutely no idea what was coming for them, and that was exactly what I wanted. Steve's office took up the 8th floor of a glass tower downtown. Modern, spotless. The kind of place that charged a fortune by the hour and earned every penny. I had driven down from the mountain that same morning, leaving before the sun came up. The meeting was at 9:00, and I arrived 20 minutes early. I stood drinking coffee in the lobby, watching lawyers and interns walk through the revolving doors. Young guys in suits with briefcases that probably cost more than my first car. A very different world from the dust plaster and scaffolding where I had spent my life. But I knew this world too. I had dealt with enough lawyers in 40 years to understand their language, their strategies, and their value. Steve came down to greet me in the lobby. No assistants, no ceremonies. Just a firm handshake and a look that understood everything. You look tired, he told me as we rode the elevator up. Barely slept. It was true. I had spent most of the night reviewing civil codes, cross-referencing laws, building a mental framework. By 3:00 a.m., I knew exactly what I needed. Now, I just needed Steve to make it legal. His office had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, a mahogany desk leather chairs and framed degrees from Ivy League schools. But what caught my eye was the model on his bookshelf. A miniature replica of the historic theater we had worked on together. I keep it there so I don't forget, Steve said, following my gaze. Best project I ever consulted on. You taught me more about historic preservation in 6 months than law school taught me about property rights in 3 years. He pointed to a chair. Now tell me everything. Don't leave out a single detail. I unpacked the situation methodically. The first call from Matt. The call from Valerie thanking me. The planning session I overheard at the coffee shop. The poker debts. The fake foreclosure. The buyer they already had lined up. Steve took notes on a yellow legal pad, asking clarifying questions every now and then. Surgeon's questions. Precise. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair. The good news is the law has sharp teeth for this. Financial exploitation is a felony. What they are attempting, fraudulent inducement, elder abuse, potentially theft by deception, carries very serious consequences. I told you no criminal charges. Understood. But you need to hear the legal context. He tapped his pen against the notepad. Your son and daughter-in-law are attempting something that, if successful, constitutes a crime. That tells me how to structure your defense. We aren't just going to protect your property. We are going to make it legally and mathematically impossible for them to get a single dime out of their little show. How? Steve stood up and walked to the window. A 3-layer shield. First, the life estate deed. You transfer the remainder interest, but reserve the absolute right to live there and use the property until the day you die. The property cannot be sold without your explicit written consent. Second, the conservation easement. We restrict the development rights on the land. No expansions, no demolitions, no structural alterations. That makes it completely unattractive to flippers or quick buyers. And third, the irrevocable trust with homestead protections. It shields the house from any creditors. If by some miracle they managed to take control, nobody could foreclose on it to pay Matt's gambling debts. I processed the information, so even if I signed the deed over to them tomorrow, the life estate means I keep living there. The conservation easement means they can't sell it to a developer, and the trust means his debt collectors can't touch it. He walked back to his desk. But here comes the masterpiece. We are going to backdate everything. Legally backdate it, notarized correctly with today's date of signing, but establishing that the intent and effect are retroactive to a date times before times Matt's phone call. Say a week before. That proves your intent to protect the property was entirely independent of his scheme. It strips them of the argument that you did this in response to his request for help. Astute. Ruthlessly astute. Can we do that legally? Absolutely. As long as we are transparent with the notary about when it is signed and when it takes effect. We create the paperwork today. We sign and notarize today. But the effective date is prior. It is perfectly valid. He pulled out fresh sheets of paper. I'm going to need the technical details. Deed records, property tax ID, any existing liens. I had brought everything. Deeds, insurance, blueprints, tax receipts. I spread it all over his desk as if they were architectural blueprints. For the next 2 hours we worked. Steve drafted while I reviewed, suggesting changes, catching loose details. The life estate document was 12 pages long. The conservation easement was longer. It had to specify every restriction. The trust was simpler. Who manages the conservation easement? I asked. The State Mountain Conservation Fund. I've worked with them. They'll accept the ecological lien as a donation. You get a tax deduction. They protect another piece of the forest. Everyone wins. He looked up. This also means any buyer would have to answer to the conservation fund. Good luck explaining to a client why you're trying to sell them land that your elderly father just ecologically locked down. By noon we had the drafts ready. Steve scheduled a notary he trusted for the afternoon. Then we talked about the appraisal. You said the cabin is worth more than what you paid, Steve asked. I think so. Original structure, treated timber, premium location. Plus, I already restored the interior finishes. Craftsmanship you just can't find anymore. Get it. Appraised. A professional appraisal, not just a market analysis. If the property is worth significantly more than what you paid, it strengthens our position. It proves it was a sophisticated investment, not just a desperate old man's last dime. I called an appraiser I knew from the restoration world, Patty. She specialized in historic and unique properties. She could head up to the cabin in 3 days and have the report in a week. Perfect timing. I would have all my weapons loaded before Matt set foot in my house. The notary arrived at 2:30. We signed everything. Steve had prepared the documents with effective dates a week before Matt's call, but after my purchase of the cabin. Fully legal, fully documented, fully bulletproof. These go to the county recorder's office first thing tomorrow morning, Steve said, handing me the copies in a leather binder. 48 hours to be recorded. By the time your son arrives, this will be part of the public record. Irrevocable. I held the binder. I felt its weight in my hands. This feels like overkill, I muttered. It's exactly the right amount of overkill. Steve's expression hardened. Arthur, your son, tried to manipulate you using your grandson as bait. His wife spoke about your mental capacity like you were a stupid child. They deserve to learn that underestimating someone's intelligence is a mistake you pay dearly for. Outside, the city sprawled under a cloudless sky. I drove back to the Blue Ridge Mountains slowly, the binder resting on the passenger seat. I stopped at Bob's house before going to mine. He opened the door with his reading glasses on the tip of his nose and a book in his hand. Got a minute, I asked. Over coffee on his porch, I explained what I had learned and what I had done. Bob listened with the sharp attention of someone who had spent decades in courtrooms. When I finished, he smiled. It wasn't a happy smile, but one of deep satisfaction. A life estate deed is a thing of beauty. Your son is going to walk right into a bear trap. He took a sip of his coffee. You know what's going to happen when he realizes, right? He's going to get mad. More than mad. He's going to feel betrayed. The irony. Considering what he was planning. But he won't care about that. Bob looked me in the eye. Are you ready for that? I wasn't. I thought of Matt at 8 years old helping me sand baseboards on a job site. At 15, sullen and distant. At 25, asking me for money again. At 38, conspiring to rob me. I'm ready, I said. Back in my cabin, I organized everything in a folder. The life estate, the easement, the trust. Copies ready for Matt and Valerie when they arrived. A welcome package, Steve had jokingly called it. The irrefutable proof that their master plan was dead on arrival. They were arriving in 6 days. 6 days to finalize everything, receive the appraisal, review my strategy, and brace for impact. 6 days before Matt discovered his old man wasn't as stupid as they thought. The days blurred together in preparation. Hattie, the appraiser, arrived with her camera and measuring tape. She spent 3 hours documenting every inch of the cabin. The original beams, the hand-carved corbels, the vintage hardware I had restored myself. Her report came back showing a fair market value of $650, $150,000 more than I had paid. Steve was right. The appraisal added crushing weight to everything. Matt texted me twice. Casual check-ins. Still on for the 17th. And times I really appreciate this, Dad. Every message felt like sandpaper scraping my skin. I replied simply, see you then. The 17th arrived. I woke up early, brewed coffee, and set the folder on the dining room table. Everything in order. The life estate with the county recorder's stamp, the easement signed by the Conservation Fund, the trust declaration, Patty's appraisal, legally recorded, publicly filed, absolutely binding. They arrived at 2:00 p.m. in 3 vehicles. Matt's Audi, followed by Valerie's Lexus SUV, and finally a silver BMW. The real estate agent, I assumed. I watched them from the window as they parked. Matt got out wearing khaki pants and a polo shirt, looking like he was heading to the country club for golf. Valerie stepped out in designer sunglasses, checking her phone. The third man, tall in his 40s, wearing an expensive suit, carried a leather briefcase. Matt saw me on the porch, raised a hand and grinned from ear to ear. Dad, thank you for doing this. They walked up the steps. Matt hugged me. It felt wrong, like hugging a stranger wearing my son's face. Valerie kissed my cheek, suffocating me in her perfume. What a beautiful place, Arthur. You have impeccable taste. The agent extended his hand. Richard Vance, Vance Real Estate. A pleasure to meet you, Arthur. Matt has spoken the world of you. I'll bet he has. Come on in, I said, calm, pleasant, channeling 40 years of dealing with problematic contractors and demanding clients. Never show weakness. Never reveal your hand too early. They settled around my dining room table. Richard opened his briefcase immediately and started pulling out papers. This should be very straightforward. He began oozing professional efficiency. We are establishing a collateral agreement with the property as backing, a basic security trust, a temporary arrangement. As soon as Matt catches up on his mortgage payments, we file the release letter. Very simple process, we do it all the time. Valerie leaned forward, feigning distress. Honestly, we don't know how to repay you for this. Sammy has been so worried even though we try to protect him. This gives us such huge breathing room. Matt nodded vigorously. The bank has been impossible. This buys us time. I let them talk. I watched as Richard spread the papers across the table, noticing how he avoided making eye contact with me while explaining clauses and technicalities. I noticed Valerie's foot bouncing under the table. Nervous energy. Anticipation. I noticed Matt's forced, casual attitude, the way he kept glancing at his watch. So if you could just sign here, Richard said, pushing the documents toward me. And initial right down here. We file this, and you will have saved your son's family. I didn't reach for the pen. Instead, I picked up my folder. Before we proceed, there's something you all need to see. The energy in the room shifted subtly, like the air pressure plummeting before a storm. I opened the folder and pulled out the first document. This is a life estate deed filed with the county recorder's office. I checked the date. On the 8th. Before you called me, Matt, I slid it across the table. It transfers the remainder interest, but retains me as the life tenant, meaning I have the absolute right to live here until the day I die. And, most importantly, the property cannot be sold, encumbered, or transferred without my explicit written consent. Richard picked it up, reading it. His expression went from professional confidence to professional panic in about 5 seconds. There's more. I pulled out the conservation easement. This restricts development rights on the property. No expansions, no demolitions, no structural changes. Registered with the State Conservation Fund. It's permanent and irrevocable. It makes the property significantly less attractive to any buyer looking to remodel or develop. Valerie's foot stopped bouncing. And this, the Irrevocable Asset Protection Trust. It protects the property against any creditors under state law, meaning even if someone managed to take control of the property, they couldn't use it to settle debts. Matt had gone pale. Not in a dramatic way, but a slow, gradual draining of color that would have been comical if it wasn't my own flesh and blood sitting there realizing his circus had just burned down. Finally, I placed Patty's appraisal on top of everything. A professional appraisal proving this property is worth $650,000, significantly more than what I paid for it, which justifies my decision to legally bulletproof it. Silence. A silence so thick you could cut it with the box cutter I'd used yesterday to open my moving boxes. Richard cleared his throat. Arthur, this significantly complicates the collateral arrangement. With these restrictions, there is no collateral arrangement, I said, my voice level cold as ice. Because there is no mortgage foreclosure. Is there, Matt? My son's mouth opened, closed, and opened again. No sound came out. Valerie tried to regain control. I don't understand what you're implying. The Rusty Pine Coffee House, I said, cutting her off instantly. 10 days ago, around 11:30 inches the morning, you were talking to your friend Rachel, telling her how you planned to sell my cabin to pay off the $100,000 Matt owes in online poker debts. I turned to Matt. Funny how that number is exactly double the mortgage arrears you told me about. The color that had abandoned Matt's face returned as hot, burning red splotches on his cheeks. Valerie's carefully maintained composure shattered like cheap glass. You were spying on us, she yelled, her voice pitching up. I was buying coffee. You were talking very loudly. I looked at Richard, who was frozen stiff like a statue. And you, how much commission were you expecting to make on this sale? 30-40 grand. Must be very disappointing to realize the property you plan to liquidate is legally untouchable. Richard started gathering his papers with clumsy, jerky movements. I think there's been a misunderstanding. I was just trying to help. You were facilitating fraud against a senior citizen, and financial exploitation is a felony in this state. I let the threat hang in the air for a moment. I am not going to file charges against any of you, but I want to be extremely clear about what almost happened here. Matt finally found his voice. Dad, listen to me. No. The word came out harder than I intended. You listen to me. For 40 years I gave you everything. College, your wedding, the down payment for your house that you never paid back. And you thank me by lying to my face, using my grandson as bait and scheming to steal the only thing I had left for my retirement. I stood up. So, this is what's going to happen. The 3 of you are going to leave. And you're going to think very, very carefully about whether the relationship you have with me is worth repairing. Valerie grabbed her purse. This is insane. Matt, say something. But Matt wasn't looking at her. He was looking at me. And for the first time in years, maybe decades, I saw something besides arrogance in his eyes. I saw fear. He finally understood. His old man wasn't the easy prey they thought, and whatever happened from now on was going to be entirely on my terms, not theirs. They left without saying another word. Richard practically ran to his BMW. Valerie stomped furiously toward her Lexus, her heels sounding like gunshots against the wooden porch. Matt stood there for a moment, moving his mouth as if he wanted to say something, but the words failed him. Finally, he turned and walked to his car. The Audi's engine roared louder than necessary. I watched as their vehicles disappeared down the dirt road, leaving a trail of dust behind them like accusations floating in the air. Then I poured myself a glass of good-aged mezcal I kept for special occasions and sat on my porch. The mountains looked exactly the same as they had this morning. Indifferent, eternal. Exactly what I needed. Bob showed up an hour later, walking through the trees that divided our lots. Saw the convoy leave, he said. Quick meeting. Real quick. I offered him the bottle of mezcal. He accepted. How'd they take it? Exactly as expected. Shock. Denial. And then, the retreat. I swirled the glass in my hand. The real estate agent looked like someone stole his commission, which I suppose I just did. Bob let out a raspy laugh. That life estate deed is a work of art. Simple, elegant, completely bulletproof. Your lawyer knows what he's doing. 40 years working with lawyers teaches you who's competent and who's just expensive. We sat in comfortable silence as the sun went down. Eventually Bob went home, and I was left alone with my thoughts, my mezcal, and my legally armored cabin. The peace lasted exactly 3 days. Then the dominoes started to fall. Bob came over to visit again, this time with news. Saw something interesting at the supermarket this morning. Your daughter-in-law was in the parking lot at Apex Luxury Motors, having what looked like a very public argument with your son. Lots of arm-waving. She peeled out so fast she left tire marks on the pavement. I could picture it. Valerie's perfect, curated image shattering into pieces in the dealership parking lot, while Matt's co-workers watched through the windows. A public spectacle. Half the lot probably heard her screaming about gambling and lies. Bob's expression was carefully neutral, but I caught the spark of satisfaction. Small town, big hell. News travels fast. And it did. Over the next week, I found out the details through various channels. Bob's wife, who knew someone who knew Valerie's friend Rachel, who apparently felt guilty about the whole charade, spilled the beans. Valerie had reached her breaking point. The cabin failure was bad enough. But then the debt collectors started calling. Collection agencies. Lawyers representing online casinos. Matt owed money to multiple betting sites, some offshore. The calls were coming in at all hours, to their house, to Valerie's cell, to Matt's work phone. That last one was the final straw at Apex Luxury Motors. Matt's boss, some guy named Richard, apparently valued discretion. Sales managers weren't supposed to have debt collectors calling the dealership demanding payouts for gambling debts. It was a bad look. It destroyed customer trust. Matt got a warning, then another. Then he was put on administrative review, which is corporate speak for times. We're gathering excuses to fire you, Valerie asked for a divorce on a Wednesday. I heard about it from Steve, who kept his ear to the ground for legal gossip. Your daughter-in-law hired the Vega firm. They aren't cheap. The filing cites irreconcilable differences, but I heard from a colleague the real issue is financial infidelity. Apparently, Matt hid the magnitude of his addiction from her until very recently. Very recently meant when his plan to steal my cabin failed. Exactly. Steve sounded amused. She's also going for full custody of your grandson using Matt's gambling addiction as evidence of instability. Smart move. Protect the kid and make Matt look even worse. Sammy. I had tried not to think about him. 10 years old, trapped between two parents who were imploding. That boy deserved so much better than the hand he was being dealt. Matt called me on a Friday night. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. Mutt. His voice sounded hollow, defeated. Nothing like the arrogant tone from 2 weeks ago when he walked into my house expecting to leave with my future in his pocket. I know I don't have any right to ask you for anything, but you don't. I kept my voice flat cold. You have no right to ask me for absolutely anything. Valerie asked for a divorce. Work is trying to fire me. The collectors call me every single day. He took a pause where he could barely breathe. I need help, please, like you've always helped me. We can forget this whole misunderstanding. Misunderstanding. The word tasted like bile. You tried to rob me, Matt. You lied and said my grandson was going to end up on the street. You brought a vulture into my house to help you take what's mine. That's not a misunderstanding. That is a felony. I chose not to report. I was desperate. The debts were drowning me, and I just thought, you thought I was too old and too stupid to fight back. I stood up and walked to the window. The ridge was turning purple in the evening light. You thought 40 years restoring architecture meant I didn't understand property law. You underestimated me because it suited you. Dad, please. I'm your son, and I am your father. Which means the best help I can give you right now is to let you solve your own problems. I softened my voice a fraction. Not much, just enough to sound human. Matt, you are 38 years old. You have a gambling addiction. You racked up $100,000 in debt. None of that is my responsibility. Maybe it's about time you grew up. He hung up. Or I did. It's hard to remember. The following week brought more shrapnel from the explosion. Valerie, feeling strategic, sent a long text to several family members explaining the situation. Her version painted Matt as the ultimate villain, a gambling addict, a liar, a manipulator, the son who tried to defraud his poor elderly father. She painted herself as the victim who had been deceived and was now bravely protecting Sammy from his father's instability. Smart. Ruthlessly true, but smart. She was controlling the narrative before Matt could, making herself the martyr and isolating him even further. The gossip reached me through my cousin Carol in the city. She called me frantic. Arthur, is this true, Matt? Tried to take your cabin. It's complicated, I told her, which was the diplomatic way of saying times. Yes, but I don't want to talk about it. The news tore through the family like wildfire in dry grass. By the end of July, everyone knew. Matt was a pariah. Valerie was the sympathetic figure, escaping an addict. And I was the senior citizen victim whom his own son had tried to mug. I hated that last part. Victim times implied weakness. It implied I didn't see it coming, that I didn't prepare, that I didn't win. But family politics weren't worth the trouble. Let them think what they wanted. The important thing was that Matt's world was collapsing exactly as it should. Natural consequences, logical outcomes, actions carry weight. I felt no guilt, just a strange, cold satisfaction. And in the quiet moments when doubt tried to sneak through the cracks, I thought of Sammy. I thought about protecting him. I thought about teaching Matt a lesson that might over time save that boy from having a father who believed manipulation and theft were acceptable ways to go through life. Sometimes mercy is disguised as punishment. Sometimes loving people requires letting them hit the ground. The mountains agreed. They had seen this before. August arrived with thunderstorms rumbling through the ridge every afternoon. I was varnishing the wood on the porch, something to keep my hands busy while Matt's world continued its spectacular collapse when Steve called me. Your son filed a lawsuit to contest the life estate deed, he told me bluntly. He claims you weren't in your right mind when you signed it. Claims undue influence from me and your neighbor Bob. I set the paintbrush aside. He did what? It's the flailing of a drowning man. Desperate and stupid. He hired some fifth-rate ambulance chaser, a guy named Flores, who specializes in messy family disputes and has a terrible track record. Steve sounded almost cheerful. The suit is so poorly drafted it practically contradicts itself. It claims you lacked the mental capacity to make legal decisions, but then cites your long career as an architect, which required complex decision-making. It's beautiful in its incompetence. What's next? We respond. Easily. I'm going to file a motion to dismiss it with prejudice. I'll include the appraisal showing the true value and your sophisticated knowledge of real estate. I'll attach letters of recommendation from colleagues testifying to your mental sharpness. The judge is going to laugh him out of the room. He paused. Though this is going to cost Matt legal fees he doesn't have. Flores charges a hefty retainer. Probably asked for at least $5,000 up front. Your son just threw away money he doesn't have on a case he can't win. After hanging up, I stood on my half-varnished porch and felt something twist in my chest. It wasn't guilt. Not exactly. But something close to it. Matt was drowning, throwing blind punches, making everything worse. A part of me, the part that remembered teaching him to ride a bike, helping him with homework, celebrating his graduation, wanted to throw him a rope. The other part remembered the Rusty Pine coffee house. Valerie's laugh. He'll end up back in a tiny apartment in the city before he even understands what hit him. I kept varnishing. 2 weeks later, Bob brought more news along with his morning coffee. No? No Apex Luxury, no? No, fired your son, he said, reading something on his phone. A friend of my wife's husband works there. Apparently, Matt pulled 3 no-shows. then showed up and got into a screaming match with his manager, claiming they were out to get him. Security dragged him out to the street yelling. I pictured it. Matt losing his temper, losing control in the middle of the dealership while customers stared. How bad was it? Bad enough that management is considering a restraining order if he shows his face again. Something about him threatening to sue everyone for wrongful termination. Bob looked up from his phone. He's in free fall, Arthur. Classic pattern. Loses control of one thing, tries to force control over everything else, and wrecks it further. That night, Matt called again. I hesitated to answer, but I decided I needed to hear this. I got fired. His voice was raspy. After 12 years, they threw me out on the street like garbage. Because of you, because of me. You humiliated me. Everyone knows what happened. Valerie told the whole world your family treats me like a criminal, and now I can't even keep my job. He was screaming now. You ruined my life because you refused to help your own son. I waited for him to run out of breath. Then quietly I replied, Matt, I didn't ruin your life. You ruined it the moment you decided to lie to me, manipulate me, and try to steal my property. Everything that has happened since then is just consequences. I was desperate. You were arrogant. There's a difference. I watched lightning flash across the ridge. You thought you deserved my cabin, that your problems gave you the right to take what I had worked for, and when I defended myself, you convinced yourself that you were the victim. I'm your son. That's why it hurts so much. His voice cracked. For the first time, I let emotion seep through. Matt, I would have helped you with the gambling debts if you had come to me straight. We would have set up a payment plan. I would have put you in therapy. We would have done something, but you didn't ask for help. You hatched a plot. There is no coming back from that. Silence on the line. Then, almost a whisper, what am I supposed to do now? Figure it out like an adult. And I hung up. The lawsuit died quietly at the end of August. The judge reviewed the documents, held a 15-minute hearing where Matt's lawyer stumbled through his arguments, while Steve presented the evidence with absolute calm. The case was dismissed outright. Matt was ordered to pay court costs. Another few grand he didn't have. Steve called it the most predictable outcome in legal history. I called it justice, but the collateral damage kept spreading. Valerie's divorce accelerated. She had found messages on Matt's phone. He was apparently communicating with betting sites through encrypted apps, hiding the extent of his addiction even from her. Her lawyer used this in the custody battle. Matt was granted supervised visits with Sammy, 2 hours every other week, with a court-appointed supervisor present. I found out about this from Sammy himself. The boy called me one night, his voice small and confused. Grandpa, my mom says I can't be alone with my dad anymore. She says he isn't safe, but he's still my dad, right? A lump formed in my throat. Sammy, my boy, your dad loves you very much. He's just going through a really tough time right now. The judge is just being careful, that's all. You and my dad had a fight. How do you explain betrayal to a 10-year-old? We had a disagreement. Grown-up stuff. But that doesn't change how much I love you. Okay. Can I come visit you whenever I want? How about next weekend? We can go hiking in the woods and see if we can spot deer. You bet. His voice brightened. My mom says you have an awesome cabin now. The most awesome one of all. I'll pick you up on Saturday. After hanging up, I felt the weight of the world. Sammy was the innocent casualty in this war. None of this was his fault, but he was paying the price. Kids always do when parents self-destruct. That weekend, Sammy came up to the cabin. Valerie dropped him off. She stayed just long enough to verify I was who I said I was, as if she hadn't known me for 15 years and left without saying a word. Sammy and I hiked the trail, spotted squirrels and a family of deer. We ate sandwiches sitting on a rock, looking out over a valley that went on forever. My dad is really sad, Sammy told me between bites of his sandwich. Sometimes he cries. My mom won't talk to him unless it's through the lawyers. I didn't know how to answer that, so I just nodded. Are you mad at him? Disappointed, I said carefully. Your dad made some very bad choices, but I still love him. That doesn't go away. Sammy seemed to accept the answer. We finished our hike, spent the afternoon playing dominoes on the porch, and he fell asleep watching the stars through the living room window. Valerie picked him up the next morning. still mute, still cold. But she hugged Sammy incredibly tight when he ran to her, and I saw something genuine in her face for the first time since this whole hell started. She loved her son. Maybe that was worth remembering. But it didn't change what they had tried to do to me. September arrived. Matt had found a part-time job working the counter at a cheap rental car agency at the regional airport. A brutal pay cut. Humiliating for someone who had been a sales manager. But it was honest work, and the debt collectors were quieted by small, steady payments. For now, the divorce would be final in November. Matt would keep the house. Valerie didn't want it anymore, but he'd have to refinance the mortgage in his name, assuming any bank would lend money to someone with his credit history. His life was in pieces. Pieces he had smashed himself, and I was the one who had refused to stop the collapse. Sometimes at night I wondered if I had been too hard on him. Then I remembered Valerie's voice in the coffee shop, the calculated cruelty, the arrogance, and I slept like a baby. By mid-September, the cold began to bite into the peaks. I was inside working on a carpentry project, building a toy chest for Sammy out of reclaimed wood, when I heard tires crunching on the dirt road. It wasn't Bob's truck. It was a different engine. I looked out the window and saw Matt's Audi, dustier than I remembered, with a dent in the passenger door. The car that used to shine flawlessly now bore the scars of neglect. He stepped out slowly. Thin. When did he get so thin? His polo shirt hung off him, and the arrogant swagger he used to walk with was gone, replaced by a hunched, defeated posture. I stepped out onto the porch to meet him. I didn't invite him inside. Not yet. Dad. His voice cracked as he said the word. Can we talk, please? Just 5 minutes. Against my better judgment, I pointed to the wooden chairs. We sat down. The silence stretched between us like an abyss. I lost everything, he finally said. Valerie is getting almost everything in the divorce. Her lawyer found some clause I didn't understand. The gambling debts are killing me, even with the payment plan. I'm working at the airport, renting cars, making minimum wage. He looked down at his hands. I know I don't deserve your help. I know what I tried to do is unforgivable. But Dad, I'm drowning and I don't know how to fix it anymore. This time there was no manipulation, no calculated pleading, just pure, raw desperation. The armor had finally cracked. I let the silence settle. I watched a hawk circle in the sky, hunting. Finally I spoke. Matt, do you know what I did for 40 years? He blinked, confused by the question. You were an architect. You restored things. That's the job title. But do you know what I actually achieved? I stood up, went into the house, pulled a box out of my study and came back out. I opened it. Inside were photographs, awards, newspaper clippings. My entire life in physical format. This is the historic Fox Theatre. I handed him a photo. A landmark building. The main facade restored to its original glory. I led the restoration team in 2012. A multi-million-dollar project. We won a National Heritage Award. Another photo. The colonial mansions downtown. I personally rebuilt the third-floor balustrade using period-accurate techniques. It took me 8 months to get it perfect. Matt stared at the images like he'd never seen them before. And maybe he hadn't. I never forced him to look. The State Capitol Dome in 2016. The gold leaf work. I was the consultant on the metallurgy and application process. I met with the governor 3 times. I pulled out a framed certificate. State Architecture Award, 2018. The highest honor in the state given at a ceremony with 200 professionals, developers, judges, politicians. I handed him the certificate. I watched his eyes scan the elegant calligraphy, the official seals, the signatures. I don't understand, he said. Why didn't you ever tell me about any of this? I did, many times. But you never asked questions. I pulled out more photos. That's the Secretary of Culture cutting the ribbon. That's me with the Director of Historic Heritage. That's me giving a lecture at the university in 2019. I leaned back in my chair. Matt, I know every major contractor in this state. Every inspector. Every zoning attorney. I have worked with judges who specialize in property law. When you walked into my cabin with that real estate agent planning to rob me, you weren't dealing with a confused old man. You were dealing with someone who spent 4 decades navigating the most complex property transactions in the country. He had gone pale again. I was getting used to that look, but you never. He struggled to find the words. You always just seemed so normal. A normal job, a normal house. You drove a 10-year-old truck. Because the money wasn't the point. I put the photos back in the box. I chose projects for their historical value, not for what they paid. I could have made 3 times as much building luxury condos for developers, but I wanted to preserve history, not bulldoze it for a few bucks. I looked him in the eye, and I wanted you to respect me for who I was as a person, as a father, not for my medals or my contacts. So I didn't flaunt them. I kept quiet. I never knew. There was genuine shock in his voice. All these years I thought you were just a regular guy who fixed old buildings. I was a regular guy who fixed old buildings. Only those buildings happened to be incredibly important, and the work required expertise very few people have. I closed the box. When you called me asking for the cabin as collateral, I knew instantly something was wrong. People in my profession do not make rushed decisions with real estate. We research, we verify, we protect our assets with every legal tool available. Matt sat completely still, processing, recalculating everything he thought he knew about his father. The conservation easement, he said slowly. The life estate. It wasn't luck. It wasn't just good advice. You knew exactly what you were doing the moment you heard Valerie in the coffee shop. I allowed myself a half smile. You underestimated me because I let you. That was my mistake. I taught you that competence was something to hide rather than celebrate. I made myself small so you wouldn't feel intimidated. I'm so sorry. His voice broke. Not just for the cabin, for never seeing you, for treating you like an ATM, for bringing Valerie into your house to lie to your face. Tears were streaming down his cheeks. 38 years old, crying like a little boy. I was so arrogant, so entitled. I thought I deserved everything I had just because I was your son. I never earned anything. I wanted to stay cold. I wanted to keep my walls up. But something about his breakdown felt real. Genuine remorse, not crocodile tears. What do you want from me, Matt? Nothing. He wiped his eyes. I don't deserve anything. I just wanted you to know that I finally understand what I did, who you are, what I threw away. He stood up. Thank you for teaching me this. I'll go now. Sit down. There was authority in my voice. He sat. I told you I wasn't going to give you money. I stand by that. But I can give you something else. What? A path forward. On my terms. I leaned toward him. First you get help. Real help. Gamblers Anonymous. Therapy every week. Documented. Second, you start cleaning up your mess. Small payments to your creditors and $600 a month to me for that 30 grand I loaned you. A formal legal payment plan. Third, you rebuild your relationship with Sammy. Not because a judge forces you to, but because he deserves better than what you've given him. Matt nodded, desperate to agree. And fourth, I held his gaze. You admit publicly to the family what you tried to do. You take full responsibility. No excuses, no justifications. Just the absolute truth. I will. I'll do it all. He meant it. I could hear it in his voice. Then we start over. A new relationship based on honesty and respect. Not money and not obligations. Are you willing to do that? Yes, without hesitation. We shook hands. It was awkward, hesitant, but it was real. Matt kept his word. The first payment arrived the following week. A direct deposit for $600. Memo times, payment 1 of 50. Loan. I put it in a separate account Steve helped me set up. Everything declared for taxes. Legal binding, real consequences with real accountability. He sent me a picture of his first Gamblers Anonymous meeting that same day. A sign-in sheet with his name on it. Then another the next week. And the next. I didn't ask how he felt. I didn't press him. I just acknowledged receipt. Small steps. The family meeting happened at the end of September. I organized it at my cousin Carol's house in the city. Neutral territory big enough for the 12 relatives who showed up. Matt drove in from the airport looking like he was going to throw up. Valerie arrived separately with Sammy, her guard up. They hadn't seen each other in weeks outside of supervised visits. Carol's living room fell dead silent when Matt stood up. Everyone knew why we were there. Valerie's text had seen to that. But now they were going to hear it from him. I tried to rob my father. His voice shook, but he held firm. Not borrow from him. Not use him as a co-signer. Rob him. I made up a story that our house was being foreclosed on. I used Sammy to make him feel guilty, and I planned to sell his cabin to pay my gambling debts. $100 grand that I lost playing online poker. Money I hid from Valerie and from all of you. Sammy was sitting between Valerie and Carol, his eyes wide open. Too young to understand everything, too old not to feel the heavy atmosphere. My dad caught me. He had set up legal protections, a life estate, a trust, because he is infinitely smarter than I gave him credit for. He spent 40 years being one of the most respected restoration experts in this state, and I treated him like he was stupid. Matt's voice cracked. I betrayed his trust. I used my son. And when it all failed, I blamed everyone but myself. Silence. Heavy, suffocating. I'm in therapy now. Gamblers Anonymous. I'm paying my debts, and I work hourly renting cars because I lost my career due to my own actions. He looked directly at me, and I am trying to earn back even a fraction of my father's respect. Not because I deserve it, but because maybe someday I can become the man Sammy deserves as a dad. Sammy started crying. Silent, real tears. Carol hugged him. Matt looked like he wanted to run and hold him, but he knew he couldn't. Not yet. I stood up, walked over to Sammy, and knelt to his level. Hey, my boy. Your dad made mistakes. Very big mistakes. But he's working hard to fix them. That's what matters now. Do you understand? Sammy nodded against my shoulder. My dad can still come to your cabin with me someday, when he's ready. When we've rebuilt the trust. I looked at Matt. These things take time. The meeting ended awkwardly. People said half-hearted goodbyes, but several, including Carol, pulled me aside. You did the right thing, she told me. Tough love. It's what he needed. Valerie left without speaking to Matt, but she no longer looked angry, just thoughtful. October brought changes. Small, incremental changes. Matt found a job at a mid-sized construction firm in the city, an entry-level position estimating budgets. He made a fraction of what he did as a sales manager, but it was honest work that required math and attention to detail. His boss had no idea about his past. He just saw a guy willing to break his back and learn. I'm reading blueprints, Matt told me during one of our Sunday calls. Learning material costs, calculating labor hours. It's humbling, but I like it. It feels real. The sign-in sheets for the meetings kept coming. 12 straight weeks, then 16. Steve helped us formalize the loan repayment in a notarized contract. Matt signed without complaint. Valerie still hadn't finalized the divorce. Her lawyer had asked for an extension citing a change in circumstances. Bob's wife heard that Valerie was watching Matt closely, looking for signs that the change was real and not just an act. A smart, calculating woman. But maybe that calculation would work in Matt's favor this time. Sammy's visits increased. Valerie agreed to unsupervised weekends every 2 weeks. Matt would pick him up on Saturday, take him to his small apartment near the airport, and then drive him up to my cabin on Sunday. The three of us would eat play cards and talk about nothing important. Sammy slowly relaxed around his dad again. One Sunday in October, after Sammy went inside to watch TV, Matt and I stayed on the porch drinking coffee. Valerie called me yesterday, he told me. Called me for real, not through the lawyers. Asked how work was going, if I was still going to meetings. We talked for almost an hour. That's progress. She's not coming back to me. Not right now. Maybe never. He paused. But she said Sammy needs his father in his life. And if I can prove that I'm stable, really stable, she'd consider shared custody. Real custody, not just visits. And what did you say? That I was going to prove it to her no matter how long it takes. He stared into his mug. I miss her. Not the version of her I thought was going to finance my life. The real Valerie. The woman who is fierce, protective, and refuses to accept less than she deserves. Wisdom. True wisdom, coming from my son's mouth. Who would have thought? Keep doing the work, I told him. The rest will figure itself out, or it won't. But at least you'll be someone Sammy can respect. He looked me in the eye. If you had given me the money like you always did, I would have blown it on poker and learned nothing. You forced me to hit rock bottom. To look in the mirror. I hated you for it then, but I thank you for it now. We sat in comfortable silence, watching the woods turn yellow with the autumn chill. Bob waved to us from his porch in the distance. Matt waved back. Normal. Almost peaceful. The gossip that had burned so bright in the summer was now just cold ashes. People had other scandals to talk about. Matt's story was old news. In its place, a quieter narrative emerged. A man hits bottom, asks for help, and rebuilds himself slowly. Nothing dramatic. Exactly what Matt needed. Space to heal without a camera in his face. The invitation caught me by surprise. Matt called me a few days later. Dad, Valerie, and I were wondering, could we come up to the cabin together? With Sammy. We want to talk to you. Properly. Valerie agreed. It was her idea, actually. He sounded nervous. Hopeful. She's been watching me follow through. The meetings, the payments, the job. She said that we both owe you more than just an apology. An acknowledgement. I picked a Saturday in late October. I made a huge pot of homemade chili my specialty, and the only thing of my cooking Matt had actually liked as a kid. I set the table for 4. They arrived together in the same car. That detail mattered. Valerie was driving. Matt was in the passenger seat. Sammy was in the back, with a backpack full of toys. They got out slowly, unsure, like visitors entering a sacred temple. Like they weren't entirely sure they had permission to step on this ground. Sammy ran to hug me. Grandpa Mom says we're having a family dinner today. Like a real family. That's right, buddy. I ruffled his hair. Go drop your stuff inside. The adults need to talk first. He disappeared inside the cabin. Matt and Valerie stood on the porch, and for the first time since this whole disaster started, I really looked at them. Matt, thinner but with a light in his eyes. Clean. Valerie, less produced. No designer sunglasses, not as much makeup. Real. Come on in, I told them. We sat at the same dining room table, where I had destroyed their plan months ago, Valerie noticed. I saw the recognition flash across her eyes. Matt pulled an envelope from his jacket. Payment number 5. He slid it across the table. $600. On time. And I'll keep doing it until the debt is paid off with interest. I took it and set it aside. You didn't come here for that. No. Valerie spoke for the first time. Her voice didn't have that fake honey coating anymore. Just truth, raw and difficult. Arthur, I need to say this. What I did, what we did, is unforgivable. I sat in a coffee shop and laughed at the idea of robbing you. I called you the old man, as if you were a business transaction, not a person. Not Matt's father, who sacrificed everything for him. Matt took over. I lied to your face. I used Sammy. I brought a vulture into your home to steal from you, and when you defended yourself brilliantly, I blamed you. I called you selfish. I said you ruined my life. His voice trembled. But you didn't ruin it. You saved it. You forced me to see what I had become. What we had become. I enabled him, Valerie continued. I pushed him toward you like you were a gold mine to be tapped. I resented you for just being an architect when you could have made millions. I never understood that you chose meaning over money. Integrity over wealth. Everything I claimed to value but deep down didn't respect. A heavy silence filled the room, full of truth. Why now, I asked. What changed? Valerie looked at Matt. For 3 months I've watched him go to those meetings. I watched him work that counter at the airport without complaining, making payments he could barely afford, being there for Sammy even when the judge said he didn't have to. And I realized he wasn't acting. He was actually changing, becoming the man I thought I married. She turned back to me, and I realized I had to change too. Stop being the woman who measures people by their bank accounts. Start being someone Sammy can look up to. Matt reached across the table and took Valerie's hand. A small gesture, immense. "We didn't come here to ask for forgiveness," Matt said. "We don't deserve it. We came to ask for a chance to prove we understand what we did, to show you over time that we are different people than we were in June." I looked at them. These two people who had conspired against me, who had calculated my worth in commissions, who had underestimated me so brutally they walked right into a legal trap that tore their lives apart. And I saw genuine repentance, earned the hard way through humiliation, financial ruin, and the loss of everything they took for granted. "You're right," I said. "What you did is unforgivable by any normal standard. You tried to steal my retirement, my dream, the cabin that cost me 40 years of sweat." I let the weight of the words land. "But there's something you don't know. I could have pressed charges. Elder financial abuse is a felony. Steve Tontichron is sown to 6 years in prison. I chose not to. Do you know why?" They shook their heads. "Because punishment without the opportunity for growth is just cruelty. I wanted you to understand what you had done, to face real consequences, to change or prove that you couldn't." I looked at my son. "And you, Matt, did change. Truly. That's rare. Steve told me 90% of people in your situation don't make it. They promise the moon, and 2 weeks later they're back at it. Not you. You showed up, you did the work, and you kept your word. Because you gave me a structure," Matt said. "Clear rules, no bailouts, just a path and a choice. And I finally chose right." I stood up, walked to my study, pulled out something I had kept safe and set it in the middle of the table. A framed photograph. Matt at 8 years old, covered in sawdust, helping me sand wood at a job site. Both of us smiling. "I've carried a lot of anger," I told them. "Justified anger. But I'm tired of carrying it. So here is what's going to happen. I forgive you both. Not because you've earned it, though, Matt, you are working on it, but because holding on to this is poisoning the time I have left with my grandson." Valerie started to cry. Silent, real tears. "But forgiveness comes with boundaries," I continued. "A new relationship with new rules. Matt pays me back every last cent of that loan. Non-negotiable. You both go to therapy, individual and couples, if you ever get back together. You are never allowed to ask me for money again. You are never allowed to ask about my finances. No, assuming future inheritances or handouts. We start from zero. You earn trust through consistency. You build something honest, or you build nothing at all." "Understood." "Yes." They said it at the exact same time. Sammy came running into the room. "I'm hungry. When are we eating?" The tension broke. We laughed. A real laugh. I served the chili. We ate on the porch, watching the sun dip low, painting the pine trees in liquid gold. Sammy wouldn't stop talking about school, his dreams of seeing the ocean, the squirrels he'd chased. A normal conversation. A family dinner. After we ate, Matt helped me clear the plates. Valerie took Sammy for a walk down the road to see Bob's horses. Alone in the kitchen, my son turned to me. "Thank you," he said, "for not giving up on me, for loving me enough to let me fall, for showing me who you really are. You're welcome. Now don't make me regret it." He smiled. "Not a chance." Through the window, I watched Valerie and Sammy walking hand in hand down the dirt road. I saw Bob wave from his house. I saw the mountains, eternal and patient. My cabin, legally bulletproof, completely secure, absolutely mine. It surrounded me with a peace I had earned twice. Once with 40 years of hard work, and again by standing firm through 4 months of a brutal storm. Matt had lost his career, his marriage temporarily, his reputation, and carried a massive debt that would take years to pay off. Valerie had lost her illusion of easy wealth and collided head-on with her own arrogance. Both had been humbled down to their roots, but here they were, together, trying. And I was here in my cabin on 847 Pine Ridge Road in the Blue Ridge Mountains, master of my own destiny, teacher of hard lessons, father of a son who finally saw me clearly. Justice served, lessons learned, life moves on. The mountains had witnessed it all. They always do. And they will still be here long after we are gone, watching other families break and heal, watching other people learn that respect isn't freely given. It is earned, it is protected, and sometimes it is fought for with everything you have. I walked out to join my family. The four of us stood on the porch as the sunset painted the ridge in fire and gold. We weren't the family we used to be. We were something that had cost us blood, something real, and for the first time in 40 years I felt absolute peace.